Picture this. You're standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. Miles of layered rock stretch before your eyes. Your tour guide points to the different colored bands and says, "This took millions of years to form." But what if I told you there's evidence suggesting something completely different? What if those layers could tell the story of one of the most famous events in human history? Noah's flood. I'm about to show you geological evidence that's been hiding in plain sight. Evidence that mainstream science doesn't want to talk about. Evidence that could change everything you thought you knew about our planet's past. Today, we're diving deep into 4 shocking discoveries that suggest Noah's flood wasn't just a story. It was a real catastrophic event that left its mark all over our planet. We'll explore massive fossil graveyards, mysterious rock layers, and geological formations that make way more sense when you think global flood instead of millions of years. But here's the thing. You won't hear about this in school textbooks. You won't see it on the Discovery Channel. Why? Well, that's exactly what we're going to uncover together. So buckle up, because we're about to take a journey that will make you question everything you've been taught about Earth's history. And trust me, by the end of this video, you'll never look at a mountain, a canyon, or even a simple rock the same way again. Let's start with something that should make anyone scratch their head. Have you ever been to a natural history museum? You know those massive dinosaur skeletons they have on display? Well, here's what they don't tell you when you're staring up at that T-Rex. Most fossils aren't found alone. They're found in what scientists call fossil graveyards. Imagine walking into your backyard and finding not just one dead animal, but thousands upon thousands of them, all buried together in the same spot. That's basically what we find all over the world. These aren't neat little individual graves. These are mass burial sites containing millions of creatures all mixed together. Take the famous Dinosaur National Monument in Colorado and Utah. We're talking about over 1,500 dinosaur bones found in one small area. But here's the kicker. They're not just dinosaur bones. Mixed in with the T-Rex and Triceratops, you'll find fish, turtles, crocodiles, and even clams. Ocean creatures mixed with land creatures. Think about that for a second. When do you ever see fish and dinosaurs hanging out together? But it gets even stranger. Let's hop over to Germany, where there's a place called the Messel Pit. Scientists have found perfectly preserved fossils of horses, bats, birds, fish, insects, and even tropical plants all buried together. The preservation is so good that you can still see the contents of fish stomachs and the color patterns on bird feathers. But here's what's wild. For fossils to be preserved this perfectly, they had to be buried really, really fast. Like catastrophically fast. Now, if you ask a mainstream geologist about this, they'll usually say something about local floods or mudslides that happened over millions of years. But think about it logically. How does a local flood mix ocean fish with land dinosaurs? How does a mudslide preserve delicate bird feathers for millions of years? Let's travel to another famous site, the Karoo Formation in South Africa. This place is absolutely mind-blowing. We're talking about billions, yes billions, of vertebrate fossils spread across an area of 600,000 square kilometers. That's bigger than France. Most of these are mammal-like reptiles, but again, they're all jumbled together like they were caught in some massive, chaotic event. The same pattern shows up everywhere you look. In China, there's the Liaoning province where they find perfectly preserved dinosaurs with their last meals still in their stomachs. In Montana, there's the famous Hell Creek Formation where dinosaurs are found mixed with marine fossils. In Australia, there are massive fish graveyards where millions of fish are found buried together, their mouths wide open as if they were gasping for air. Here's what's really interesting. When you map out all these fossil graveyards around the world, they don't follow the neat, organized pattern you'd expect from millions of years of gradual deposition. Instead, they look exactly like what you'd expect from one massive, global catastrophe. A catastrophe that caught everything off guard and buried it all together in a chaotic jumble. Think about it like this. If your house gets flooded, everything gets mixed together, right? Your books end up with your kitchen utensils. Your clothes get mixed with your electronics. That's exactly what we see in these fossil graveyards. Everything mixed together as if it was all caught up in one massive flood event. But there's more. Many of these fossils show signs of extreme stress and panic. Dinosaurs found with their necks arched back in what scientists call a death pose. The exact position animals take when they're drowning. Fish found in massive schools, all oriented the same direction as if they were trying to escape something. Marine creatures found on mountaintops thousands of miles from any ocean. The evidence is literally written in stone, but it's telling a very different story than what we've been taught. What do you think about these fossil graveyards? Have you ever visited one of these sites? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started. Now let's talk about something you see every day but probably never really think about. Rock layers. You know when you're driving through mountains and you see those striped patterns on the cliff faces? Those bands of different colored rock? Well, those layers are about to blow your mind. According to mainstream geology, each layer represents thousands or millions of years of slow sediment deposition. They'll tell you that the bottom layers are the oldest, and as you go up, you're looking at progressively younger rock. Sounds reasonable, right? But when you actually look at the evidence, really look at it, this story starts falling apart faster than a house of cards. First, let's talk about something called polystrate fossils. Don't let the fancy name scare you. It's actually pretty simple. Poly means many, and strata means layers. So polystrate fossils are fossils that cut through many layers of rock. We're talking about fossil trees that start in one rock layer and extend up through multiple other layers that supposedly took millions of years to form. Now, think about this logically. If these rock layers really took millions of years to form, how is it possible for a tree fossil to extend through all of them? Trees don't live for millions of years. The only way this makes sense is if all those layers were deposited rapidly, before the tree had time to decay. There's a famous example in Yellowstone National Park where fossil forests are stacked on top of each other through multiple rock layers. The Park Service will tell you these represent different forests that grew over millions of years. But here's the problem. The trees in these different forests are all the same species, and they're all fossilized in the exact same way. It looks way more like one forest that got buried catastrophically than multiple forests over millions of years. But the real smoking gun is something called soft sediment deformation. This is when you see rock layers that are bent, folded, and twisted while they were still soft, like wet cement that got pushed around before it hardened. If these layers really formed over millions of years, they should have been rock hard before the next layer was deposited on top. But instead, we see massive geological formations where multiple layers are all bent together as one unit. Take the famous Kaibab Plateau near the Grand Canyon. There are rock layers there that are bent in massive curves and folds, but here's the crazy part. There are no cracks or breaks in the layers. They bent while they were still soft. All of them. Together. How is that possible if they were deposited millions of years apart? Let's zoom out and look at the bigger picture. The Grand Canyon itself is one of the best examples of what rapid water erosion can do. The Colorado River supposedly carved this massive canyon over millions of years, but there's a huge problem with this story. The river flows uphill in several places. That's right, according to the official story, the Colorado River somehow managed to carve through solid rock while flowing uphill. That's like saying water can flow up a mountain. But if you think about a massive flood scenario, everything makes perfect sense. A global flood would deposit sediments rapidly in horizontal layers. Then, as the floodwaters receded, they would carve channels and canyons through those soft sediments. The Grand Canyon could have been carved in weeks or months, not millions of years. This rapid erosion isn't just theoretical. We've actually observed it happening. Mount St. Helens erupted in 1980, and in just a few hours, it carved canyons that look exactly like miniature versions of the Grand Canyon. We're talking about canyons 100 feet deep carved in a single day. If that's possible in hours, imagine what a global flood could do over several months. Here's another mind-blowing example. The channeled Scablands in Washington state. This area covers thousands of square miles and looks like it was carved by absolutely massive floods. For decades, mainstream geologists insisted this was formed by slow processes over millions of years. But then they discovered evidence of the Missoula floods, catastrophic floods that carved the entire landscape in a matter of days. They finally had to admit that catastrophic flooding could reshape entire regions almost instantly. Now, imagine that on a global scale. The rock layers themselves tell another interesting story. Instead of the gradual changes you'd expect from millions of years of slow deposition, we see sharp, distinct boundaries between layers. It's like someone took different types of sediment and laid them down one after another, quickly, before mixing could occur. This is exactly what you'd expect from a massive flood that sorted sediments by size and weight as the water energy decreased. We also see something called flat gaps in the rock record. Places where supposedly millions of years of rock layers are simply missing, with no evidence of erosion between the layers above and below. How do you lose millions of years of rock without any trace? It's like pages missing from a book with no torn edges. The simplest explanation? Those missing millions of years never existed in the first place. The evidence is all around us, written in stone, pointing to one massive, catastrophic flood event that deposited these layers rapidly and then carved the canyons as it receded. Are you starting to see the pattern here? Let me know in the comments what you think about these rock layers, and don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you're finding this information as mind-blowing as I am. Let's talk about something that powers much of our modern world but holds secrets about our ancient past: coal. You probably think of coal as those black rocks that come from deep underground, but what if I told you that coal formations actually provide some of the strongest evidence for Noah's flood? Here's what they teach you in school. Coal formed from ancient swamps and forests over millions of years. Dead plants piled up, got compressed, and slowly turned into coal. Sounds simple enough, right? But when you actually look at how coal seams are formed and where they're found, this story completely falls apart. First, let's talk about what coal actually is. When you look at coal under a microscope, you can still see plant material: bark, leaves, wood fibers. But here's the thing that should make you go, This plant material isn't rotted or decayed like you'd expect from millions of years in a swamp. Instead, it's perfectly preserved, like it was buried so quickly that bacteria didn't have time to break it down. Think about what happens when you leave a pile of leaves in your backyard. In just a few weeks, they start rotting. In a few months, they're mostly gone. But the plant material in coal looks like it was fresh when it got buried. How is that possible if it sat around in swamps for thousands or millions of years? But that's just the beginning. Let's talk about coal seam thickness. We're not talking about thin layers here. Some coal seams are over 100 feet thick. The famous Pittsburgh coal seam runs under parts of Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia, and it's incredibly consistent in thickness and quality across hundreds of square miles. Now, think about this logically. If coal formed from swamp plants over long periods, you'd expect to see gradual changes. Thicker here, thinner there, different types of plants mixed in. But instead, these coal seams are remarkably uniform, like someone took millions of tons of plant material and spread it out evenly across vast areas all at once. Here's where it gets really interesting. Many coal seams contain marine fossils. That's right, ocean creatures found in coal that supposedly formed from land plants. We're talking about fish, shells, and even corals mixed in with the tree bark and leaves. When do you ever see ocean life living in a forest swamp? Never. But this makes perfect sense if you think about a massive flood that mixed marine and terrestrial plant material together before burying it all rapidly. Let's travel to some specific examples. In Nova Scotia, there's a place called Joggins where you can see fossilized trees standing upright through multiple coal seams. These trees, some over 40 feet tall, extend through layers that supposedly took thousands of years to form. But trees don't stay standing for thousands of years. They would have rotted and fallen over long before the next layer formed. The only way this makes sense is if all these layers, including the coal seams, were deposited rapidly in one catastrophic event. But there's more evidence that coal formed quickly, not slowly. Scientists have actually created coal in the laboratory in just a few hours using heat and pressure. When they take modern plant material and subject it to conditions similar to what you'd find in a massive flood event, they get something that looks remarkably like natural coal. Here's another smoking gun. Coal seams often contain what are called coal balls. These are round formations within the coal that contain perfectly preserved plant fossils. The preservation is so good that you can still see individual cell structures in leaves and wood. This kind of preservation requires rapid burial and rapid chemical changes. Exactly what you'd expect from a catastrophic flood, not millions of years in a swamp. Let's talk about the distribution of coal deposits around the world. If coal formed from local swamps over millions of years, you'd expect to find it scattered randomly based on where ancient swamps happen to be. But that's not what we see. Instead, coal deposits follow specific patterns that look remarkably like what you'd expect from massive moving water sorting and depositing materials by weight and size. The Appalachian coal region stretches from Pennsylvania to Alabama in consistent layers. The Illinois basin contains coal seams that extend across multiple states. These aren't random swamp deposits. They're organized layers that suggest massive, continent-wide deposition events. But here's something really mind-blowing. Many coal seams are found at high elevations, sometimes thousands of feet above sea level. The official explanation is that these areas were at sea level when the coal formed and then got lifted up over millions of years. But there's a much simpler explanation. These areas were covered by a global flood that deposited plant material at high elevations before the waters receded. We also find coal in Antarctica, buried under ice and snow. The official story says Antarctica used to be tropical and then drifted to its current location over millions of years. But what if Antarctica was covered with vegetation before a global flood, and that vegetation got buried rapidly along with everything else? The evidence keeps stacking up. Coal seams often contain fossilized logs that show no signs of root systems. They're not trees that grew in place, but trees that were transported by water and buried rapidly. We find massive fossil logs in coal seams that are oriented in the same direction, as if they were all carried by flowing water. Even the way coal burns tells us something about how it formed. Coal contains a lot of energy because the plant material was preserved so well. If this material had really sat in swamps for millions of years, most of the energy would have been lost to decay and bacterial action. The bottom line is this: everything we observe about coal formation points to rapid burial of massive amounts of plant material in a catastrophic water event, not slow formation in swamps over millions of years. What's your take on this coal evidence? Have you ever thought about where coal actually comes from? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to hit that like button if this is changing how you think about Earth's history. Now we come to the most incredible part of our journey. Evidence that this wasn't just any flood, but a truly global catastrophe that left its mark on every continent. When you start looking for it, the evidence of worldwide flooding is absolutely everywhere. Let's start with something that should make everyone stop and think: flood legends. Nearly every culture on Earth has a story about a great flood that destroyed the world. We're talking about hundreds of different cultures, from Native American tribes to ancient Chinese records, from Australian Aboriginal stories to African tribal legends. These aren't just similar stories. They contain remarkably specific details that match up across cultures that had no contact with each other. The Babylonians had the Epic of Gilgamesh, which talks about a man who built a giant boat to save animals and his family from a world-destroying flood. The ancient Greeks told stories about Deucalion's flood. The Hindus have their own flood story in the Matsya Purana. Even the ancient Mayans recorded a great flood that destroyed the previous world. Now, skeptics will say these stories spread from culture to culture, but that doesn't explain how isolated island cultures in the Pacific have the same basic flood story as tribes in the Amazon rainforest who never had contact with the outside world. The simplest explanation? They all remember the same event. But let's move from stories to hard geological evidence. One of the most stunning pieces of evidence is something called the iridium layer. This is a thin band of sediment found all over the world that contains unusually high levels of iridium, a metal that's rare on Earth but common in asteroids and comets. Here's where it gets interesting. This iridium layer is found at exactly the same geological level worldwide. We're talking about the same layer in North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, and Australia. What could deposit a worldwide layer of sediment all at the same time? A global catastrophe. But there's more. Scientists have found what they call shocked quartz in this same worldwide layer. This is quartz that has been subjected to enormous pressure, the kind of pressure you get from massive impacts or explosive volcanic events. Again, this shocked quartz layer is found all over the world at the same geological level. Let's talk about marine fossils found on mountaintops. This is something that even mainstream geology acknowledges but struggles to explain. We find seashells, fish fossils, and coral reefs on some of the highest mountains in the world. Mount Everest, nearly 30,000 feet above sea level, contains marine limestone with ocean fossils near its peak. The official explanation is that these mountains were once under the ocean and then got pushed up over millions of years. But there's a problem with this story. Many of these marine fossils show no signs of the crushing and deformation you'd expect from millions of years of mountain building pressure. Instead, they look like they were deposited recently and then elevated rapidly. Here's something that will blow your mind. Massive underwater canyons that extend from continents far out into the ocean floor. The Hudson Canyon extends 400 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean from New York Harbor. The Congo Canyon extends nearly 500 miles from the African coast. These aren't small creek beds. These are massive canyons that were clearly carved by enormous amounts of flowing water. The official explanation is that these were carved when sea levels were much lower during ice ages. But the scale of these canyons suggests water flows far beyond anything that could be explained by normal river systems or even ice age conditions. They look exactly like what you'd expect from massive amounts of water rushing off the continents as a global flood receded. Let's talk about something called erratic boulders. These are massive rocks, sometimes the size of houses, found hundreds of miles from where that type of rock naturally occurs. We find granite boulders from Canada scattered across the northern United States. We find limestone blocks from one part of Europe found hundreds of miles away in completely different geological regions. The mainstream explanation involves glaciers carrying these boulders during ice ages. But here's the problem. Many of these erratic boulders are found in places where glaciers supposedly never reached, and they're often sitting on top of softer sediments that should have been crushed if a glacier had deposited them there. But if you think about massive flood currents carrying these boulders in floating ice or debris rafts, their distribution makes perfect sense. Here's another global marker, something called tillites. These are rock formations that look like they were formed from a mixture of rocks, sand, and clay all jumbled together. They're found on every continent, often in places where the climate today couldn't possibly support the glacial activity that supposedly created them. For example, we find tillites in Africa, India, and Australia, places that are tropical today but supposedly had massive glaciers in the past. The official explanation involves continental drift and climate change over millions of years. But there's a simpler explanation. These tillites were formed by massive flood currents that mixed and deposited sediments rapidly all over the world. Let's talk about the Missoula floods I mentioned earlier, but think about them in a global context. These floods in Washington state moved boulders the size of cars for hundreds of miles, carved canyons hundreds of feet deep in a matter of days, and left ripple marks that are still visible today. Ripple marks that are hundreds of feet from crest to crest. If regional floods can do this kind of damage in a few days, imagine what a global flood could accomplish. We see similar evidence of catastrophic water erosion on every continent. Massive channel systems, giant ripple marks, and scoured bedrock that looks like it was carved by unimaginably powerful water flows. Here's something really interesting. The worldwide distribution of oil and natural gas deposits. If these formed gradually in local basins over millions of years, you'd expect them to be randomly distributed. But instead, oil and gas deposits follow specific patterns that suggest they were all formed during the same time period by the same processes. Exactly what you'd expect from a global catastrophe that buried organic material rapidly worldwide. The evidence even shows up in tree ring data from around the world. There's a period in ancient tree rings where growth patterns suggest a global catastrophe that affected climate worldwide. Trees from North America, Europe, and Asia all show the same pattern of stress and recovery at the same time period. Even the way mountain ranges are formed provides evidence. Instead of the slow, gradual mountain building that mainstream geology teaches, we see evidence of rapid, catastrophic mountain building that happened in a relatively short time period. This is exactly what you'd expect during the final stages of a global flood as continents readjusted and water levels changed rapidly. The evidence is literally everywhere you look, from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks, from frozen tundra to tropical rainforests. Every continent bears the scars of the same global catastrophe. This is incredible stuff, right? What evidence do you find most convincing? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see this information. So there you have it. 4 chapters of geological evidence that mainstream science doesn't want you to think about too deeply. We've seen fossil graveyards that suggest rapid, catastrophic burial. We've examined rock layers that point to rapid deposition rather than millions of years. We've looked at coal seams that formed from rapid plant burial, not slow swamp processes. And we've explored global markers that suggest a worldwide catastrophe. But here's the thing. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more evidence out there, hiding in plain sight, waiting for people to connect the dots. The question isn't whether there's evidence for Noah's flood. The question is why this evidence isn't being taught in our schools and universities. Maybe it's because this evidence challenges some very fundamental assumptions about Earth's history. Maybe it's because accepting this evidence would require rewriting textbooks and changing how we think about geology, biology, and even human history. Or maybe it's simply because paradigm shifts take time, and we're living through one right now. What I want you to do is simple. Don't just take my word for it. Go look at this evidence yourself. Visit a natural history museum and ask questions about those fossil displays. Take a road trip to the Grand Canyon and think about what you're really looking at. Read scientific papers about coal formation and ask yourself if the official explanations really make sense. Most importantly, think for yourself. Question everything. The truth isn't afraid of investigation. It welcomes it. If this video opened your eyes to possibilities you'd never considered before, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I've got so much more evidence to share with you, and trust me, we're just getting started. In my next video, we're going to explore something even more mind-blowing, evidence that humans and dinosaurs might have coexisted, and why that evidence is being systematically ignored or explained away. You won't want to miss that one. Also, if you found this video valuable, please share it with your friends and family. This information needs to get out there. People deserve to know about the evidence that's been hiding in plain sight. Drop a comment below and let me know, what evidence convinced you the most? What questions do you still have? And what topics would you like me to cover in future videos? Thanks for watching, thanks for thinking, and remember, the truth is out there, written in stone, waiting for us to read it with fresh eyes. I'll see you in the next one.